Disclaimer: this video is a work of fan fiction and is not affiliated with BTS Big Hit Entertainment or any official content. The storylines, characters, and interactions depicted are fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. This video is intended for fans of Taekook and is not meant to be taken as factual or representative of real events or relationships. Introduction: Kim Taehyung, the groom, age 28, status CEO of Kim Empire, personality cold, ruthless, intelligent, dangerously charming, appearance tall, sharp jawline, intense brown eyes that hold us a thousand secrets, always dressed in sleek black suit, hidden inside a wounded heart. Taehyung doesn't believe in love, not after what was taken from him, not after the betrayal that shattered his family. He is a man of power and silence, respected by many, feared by more. When he smiles, people flinch because Kim Taehyung only smiles when he is about to ruin something. And now he has only one goal: revenge. He will marry Jungkook, the soft-hearted son of the family who destroyed everything. Everything Taehyung once loved. But not for love, for revenge. He doesn't want a husband. He wants a weapon, a weakness to use, a heart to break. But what he didn't expect was for Jungkook to smile back at him even through the tears. Jeon Jungkook, age 23, status youngest son of the Jeon family, personality innocent, obedient, quiet but not weak. Appearance big round eyes, soft pouty lips, slightly long hair that falls into his eyes, delicate frame, hidden side, fierce but when pushed. Jungkook has always followed orders as the youngest son of the powerful but cruel family. He learned early that being silent kept him safe. So when his father tells him to marry Kim Taehyung, the man knows as the devil in a suit. He doesn't protest. He nods, he wears the suit, he walks down the aisle, even if his heart trembles with fear. But Jungkook is not as weak as they think, and this marriage meant to destroy him may just awaken the fire he kept buried for years. Because even the softest heart, when bruised enough, can become dangerous. The hall was grand, golden chandeliers sparkled above, rose petals scattered across the marble floor, and rows of powerful families sat in silence waiting for the show to begin. No one smiled because this wasn't a wedding of love, this was a deal, a warning, a declaration of quit war. At the front stood Kim Taehyung, dressed in a sharp custom black suit. His face wasn't readable, his postures perfect, his lips curled into a calm smirk, but behind his eyes there was fire. This is it. The Jones had destroyed his father's business. They had humiliated his family, stolen what was his. Now they were offering their youngest son like a peace treaty. And Theon he accepted not for peace but for revenge. He would take their son, he would own him, break him, use him, and when the time was right, leave him in ruins. The priest let the ceremony begin. The priest announced the music started, and then the doors opened. A soft gas passed through the crowd. Jeon Jungkook stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a pale cream suit that clung gently to his slender body, dark brown hair falling into his big doe eyes, lips trembling ever so slightly as he looked at the man he was about to marry. His steps were small, careful, like walking toward his own funeral. Every eye in the room was on him, but Jungkook only looked at one person, Taehyung, the man who hadn't smiled at him once, the man who hadn't even touched his hand at the engagement dinner, the man who radiated danger, and yet Jungkook kept walking because he had no choice. Because this marriage had his father's demand, and he had been trained all his life to obey. When he reached the altar, Jungkook stood still beside Taehyung, hands trembling slightly. Taehyung didn't spare him a glance. He didn't take his hand. He just turned to the priest with a bored expression. Let's get this over with. The priest hesitated but continued. Kim Taehyung, do you take Jeon Jungkook as your lawfully wedded spouse? Taehyung, lips curved ever so slightly. I do, he said like it was a sentence, not a vow. Jungkook swallowed hard. The priest, and you, Jeon Jungkook, take Kim Taehyung as your lawfully wedded husband? Silence. The hall held its breath. Jungkook's voice was soft, shaking. I do, and just like that, it was done. The priest smiled nervously. You may now. Before he could finish, Theon leaned forward and pressed a cold, empty kiss on Jungkook's forehead. Not lips, not cheeks, forehead. Like he was blessing him before destruction. The guest clapped. politely, but Jungkook felt something shattered inside him. That night, Taehyung's mentioned, the wedding was over, the guests had left, the car ride had been silent. Now Jungkook stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, unsure. Taehyung stood by the window, drink in hand, staring at the dark city skyline. "You will sleep in the guest room," he said coldly. "We may be married on paper, but don't misunderstand your place." Jungkook nodded quickly. "Yes." Taehyung turned, eyes sharp. "No questions?" Jungkook shook his head. "You don't want me here, I understand." Theung scoffed. "Smart boy." Jungkook turned to leave but paused, then whispered softly, "I hope someday you can look at me without hate in your eyes." Theung didn't respond. He just sipped his drink, watching the boy walked away into a dark hallway, but inside, a flicker of something twist in his chest, a flicker he didn't want to name. The Kim mansion was silent, not peaceful, silent like a cage. It had been 3 days since the wedding, 3 days of walking on eggshells, 3 days of being ignored, avoided, and insulted. Jungkook sat quietly in the massive dining room, alone at a long table meant for 20 people. The maids placed delicate dishes in front of him, but his appetite was long gone. He hadn't seen Theon since the night of their wedding, not properly, just passing glances in the hallway, cold, distant, sharp, until now. Click clack. Footsteps echoed through the marble floor. Theung entered the room like a king entering his court, dressed in another black suit, hair perfectly styled, jaw clenched. Jungkook stood up quickly, trying to be respectful. "Good morning." Theung didn't respond. He sat at the head of the table, pulled out his phone, and scrolled silently as if Jungkook didn't exist. Jungkook sat back down slowly, hands folded in his lap, silence, and then, "Theung, you really didn't speak unless spoken to, do you?" Theung said quietly. Suddenly his voice icy. Jungkook blinked. "I didn't want to bother you." Theung laughed, cold, mocking. "Bother me, Jungkook. Your entire existence is a bother." Jungkook flinched. "I'm sorry." Theung set his phone down and leaned back in his chair. "Do you think this is a fairy tale?" he asked, voice low. "Do you think you will win my heart by being silent and obedient?" Jungkook stayed quiet. "I didn't marry you because I wanted you," Theung said, staring him down. "I married you because your family destroyed mine." "Because your father ruined my father's legacy. You are nothing more than a pretty pawn in my plan to destroy the Junes." Jungkook's heart sank, but he said nothing. "Theon, I will never love you," Theon continued coldly. "So stop hoping. You are not my husband. You are just a part of my revenge." Jungkook, that broke something inside Jungkook. Still, he bowed his head. "I understand." Theon was expecting tears, begging, but Jungkook simply stood and walked away with his head down. Quick steps echoed as he left the room, and for some reason that silence burned deeper than any scream would have. Later that night, Jungkook stood on the balcony of the guest room, arms wrapped around himself. The wind was cold, but his chest felt colder. "You are not my husband. You are part of my revenge." The words echoed again and again. He had always known this marriage wasn't for love, but hearing it being thrown away so easily still hurt like hell. Still, he refused to cry. He wouldn't give Theung the satisfaction. Behind his soft eyes, a quiet strength began to grow. "If this is how it's going to be, Kim Theung, then fine. I will endure it, but one day you will regret hurting me like this." Time skipped 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding. 14 days of cold glares, sharp words, and icy silence. 14 days since Jungkook had heard a kind word inside his own home. But he never complained, not once. He did everything the house staff asked him to do. He dressed properly, stayed quiet, kept his head down, and in front of Theon, he smiled politely, even when it hurt, even when he wanted to cry. But today, Theon decided to put on a show. A business gala that evening. The ballroom was packed with powerful people, CEOs, shareholders, politicians. The Kim name was glowing in lights, banners hanging high above annual Kim Industries charity ball. Theong has always looked breathtaking, a black velvet suit with the wine red shirt, his hair pushed back, a close mid grazing his lip. He was at the center of attention. And by his side, and by his side was Jungkook, dressed in white, simple, elegant, quiet, like a doll someone placed beside the prince. He stood still, hands folded, avoided every pair of eyes that looked him up and down with judgment. Because everyone knew that they knew this marriage wasn't real, they whispered. First, isn't that the Jeon boy? Second, he looks too soft for Taehyung. First, I bet it was an arranged deal. Second, poor thing, he looks terrified. And Taehyung, he didn't stop. In fact, he added fuel to the fire. While talking to a group of businessmen, one of them chuckled and asked Taehyung, Aman, your husband is the quit one, shy. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook standing a few feet behind him and said loudly, Oh, he's not shy. He's just trained to keep his mouth shut. Isn't that right, sweetheart? The man laughed. Jungkook's finger curled at his sides, but he didn't say anything. He bowed his head. Theon wasn't done. He turned back and added, I told him to look pretty and stand still, and he's doing a great job. At least he's useful for something. Laughter, mocking eyes. Jungkook felt his heart shrink in his chest. He wanted to disappear. Later, while walking through the hall, Jungkook followed a few steps behind Theung as always. He wasn't allowed to walk beside him, not in public. Theung, fix your posture. Theung snapped over his shoulder. You are not a servant. At least act like the king. Jungkook straightened up silently. They passed by a group of models whispering loudly about him. First, that's him. Seriously. Second, I thought Theung had traced. First, looks like a scared rabbit. Theung heard it and said nothing, not a single word in Jungkook's defense. That night, Kim mentioned, the ride home was silent. Theung removed his suit jacket and walked into the living room. Jungkook followed like a shadow. Theung turned to him suddenly. Why do you let them talk about you like that? Jungkook looked up, surprised. What? Theon, you just stood there, quit letting them look at you like trash. It's pathetic. Jungkook's voice was barely a whisper. You do it too. Theon froze. Jungkook immediately lowered his head again. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak out of turn, but Theon was already walking away, something sharp and confusing twisting in his chest. Why did those words sting? Why did he feel angry at himself that night? Theung poured himself a drink, tried to sleep, but Jungkook's soft voice kept echoing, You do it too, and forced the image of Jungkook standing silently at the party, trying not to cry, still following him like a loyal husband, refused to leave his mind. Theung cursed himself under his breath. He was supposed to break Jungkook, so why did he feel broken instead? To be continued.